This video was brought to you by Brilliant. The first 200 people to use the link below get 20% off an annual subscription. On Sunday, Colombians went to the polls for the first round of the 2022 presidential elections. In a shock result, establishment candidate Federico Gutierrez failed to make it into the final two, which means the runoff on June the 19th will be between a former Marxist guerrilla and an outspoken 77-year-old right-wing firebrand known as Colombia's Trump. So in this video, we're going to be looking at the results, who might win in the second round, and what this will all mean for Colombia. So let's get right into it. Colombia elects a president every 4 years via a two-round runoff system, whereby if no candidate gets 50% of the vote in the first round, which is what usually happens, then the top two candidates go through to a runoff. This year's election was essentially a three-horse race between Gustavo Petro, a former left-wing guerrilla who lost in 2018 and is currently vying to be Colombia's first ever leftist president, Federico Gutierrez, a centre-right establishment politician known as Fico, and Rodolfo Hernandez, a 77-year-old former mayor of Bucaramanga whose campaign has focused on corruption and been mainly run via TikTok. Polling in the run-up to the election suggested that Petro and Fico were set to make it through to the second round, but in the end, an unusually high turnout apparently ended up benefiting Hernandez at Fico's expense. At time of writing, with 99% of votes counted, Petro is in first place, with 40.35% of the vote, Hernandez in second with 28.2%, and Fico in third with just 23.9%. This is bad news for Petro, because head-to-head polling suggests that he enjoys less of a lead over Hernandez than Fico. This is partly because, while they're from different sides of the political aisle, both candidates have run an anti-establishment, anti-corruption platform, which seems to be popular in Colombia at the moment. There is some irony in this. Petro has run for president twice before and has been a member of Congress for decades, while Hernandez himself is currently facing corruption charges. Nonetheless, the fact that one of them is set to win is huge news for Colombian politics, which has, for the last 20 years or so, been dominated by a centre-right brand of politics known as Uribismo, named after former Colombian president Álvaro Uribe. Uribe came to power in 2002, promising to crack down on the left-wing guerrilla groups that were waging an asymmetric civil war against the Colombian authorities, and that's exactly what he did. We're not going to get into the Colombian conflict in too much detail here because, well, it's really complicated and we don't have the space. But for the last 70 years or so, left-wing groups in Colombia have been fighting the Colombian government. Colombia is one of the most unequal countries in the world, and these groups have enjoyed significant support amongst poorer, rural Colombians. The largest and best-known group is the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, commonly known as FARC, who had some 15,000 active members at the peak of their power. The conflict got a bit more complicated in the 70s with the introduction of right-wing paramilitary groups, who helped the government fight the left-wing guerrillas while running their own illegal narcotics operations. But all you really need to know for this video is that when Uribe came into power in 2002, the biggest problem in Colombia was civil violence. With the help of paramilitaries, Uribe cracked down hard on the guerrilla groups, forcing them to either disband or enter negotiations. The falling crime rate and his centre-right economic policies encouraged foreign investment, and by the end of his term in 2006, Uribe had halved the murder rate and nearly doubled Colombia's GDP. As you can imagine, this made him pretty popular, and in 2006, he and his supporters amended Colombia's constitution to allow him to run for a second term. He won the 2006 election convincingly, and when Colombia's constitutional court wasn't allowed to run for a third term, he sent out his defense minister, Juan Manuel Santos, to run as his proxy. Santos then won a second term in 2010, although he fell out with Uribe after opening peace negotiations with the FARC. Uribe argued that Santos wasn't being harsh enough on the guerrillas, and in 2013 he started a new Uribist political party called Democratic Center. When a peace deal between the government and the FARC was finally agreed in 2016, Uribe's Democratic Center campaigned against it, and the deal was ultimately rejected in a referendum. The deal still went ahead later that year after Santos made some tweaks and got the Senate to ratify it without a public referendum. But its implementation has been delayed by Santos' successor, Ivan Duque, who won the 2018 presidential election. Duque, by the way, is backed by Uribe and a member of his Democratic Center party. Anyway, you get the point. For the last 20 years or so, Colombia has been ruled by either Uribe or one of his minions, which is why it's such big news that the most Uribe candidate of this election, Fico, hasn't even made it to the second round, and that the frontrunner used to be a member of one of those left-wing guerrilla gangs we were talking about earlier. This doesn't mean that Petro is a Marxist when it comes to policy. He wants to reduce the fiscal deficit, mostly by raising taxes on Colombia's wealthiest people and introducing a tax on dividends, as part of what he describes as a, quote, social democratic economy. As things stand, tax revenues make up just 19% of GDP, far below the OECD average of 33%. He also wants to reduce Colombia's economic dependence on fossil fuel exports, which accounts for nearly 45% of all exports, by ending fossil fuel subsidies. He instead wants to encourage Colombia's domestic agricultural industry by introducing protective agricultural tariffs, although he hasn't said at what rate. When it comes to drug policy, Petro has a pretty radical take. He wants to, quote, end the war on drugs, which seems to mean decriminalising and regulating both cocaine and marijuana production. Petro points out that the vast majority of fatal drug overdoses aren't caused by cocaine or marijuana, but instead by amphetamines, and that the war on drugs has killed an estimated 1 million people in Latin America. If he were to win, Petro would be Colombia's first leftist president in modern history. For his part, Hernandez also wants to cut the deficit, but by making spending cuts instead of tax reforms. He actually wants to cut taxes and plans to raise funds by selling off presidential planes and helicopters, closing Colombia's embassies and consulates because the civil servants employed there, quote, don't do any work, and only offering foreign representatives tap water. He also plans to save money by smoking out corrupt officials. He plans to hold daily press conferences where he wants to name and shame corrupt politicians, and he's offered snitches 20% of any money that can be clawed back as a result. His drug policies include offering free cocaine to addicts as a public health measure. All in all, if both candidates can stay alive, and that's not really a joke given Colombia's history on political violence, the next 2 weeks look set for an entertaining contest between two real characters. But until then, you might as well brush up on some of your STEM skills with the sponsor of today's video, Brilliant.
Brilliant is an online STEM learning platform that allows you to get smarter every day by learning huge important topics through engaging and interactive experiences. Gone are the long boring lectures that I sat through to get my computer science degree, instead replaced by puzzles and interactive experiences which teach you the knowledge you need to know in a way you actually want to learn. It really is all the knowledge you could need too, because Brilliant have courses from the very basics of computer science and maths right through to neural networks, quantum computing, and even quantitative finance to help you better understand financial markets. All of these courses are designed by award-winning instructors and built upon the principle of active learning, so you're gaining STEM knowledge by actually doing it. So if you want to improve with STEM, then you can sign up to Brilliant at brilliant.org/TLDR Global. And the first 200 people to do so will get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thanks for supporting the channel.